My name is Jocelyn Hayes. I am 28 years old. I was sitting at my parents' dining table in Fresno, California, while my mom pointed a shaking finger over a bowl of mashed potatoes and told the whole room I was trying to send my older sister to prison over a little bit of money. My dad's jaw was locked. My grandmother stared at her plate, and my sister Monica dabbed at dry eyes like she was the tragic heroine instead of the person who had burned through my entire house fund. My mom's voice climbed over the clatter of forks. "If you don't drop those charges, Jocelyn, this family is done with you." I set my fork down and felt every stare land on me, realizing I was finally completely done, being the quiet younger sister who absorbed the damage so everyone else could keep eating in peace. Before I tell you what I said back, and how we ended up in a courtroom instead of just at this table, I need to rewind a bit. While you listen, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, whether your family's ever crossed a line like this, and what you would have done sitting in my chair that night. Earlier that year, on a Tuesday morning in my small apartment near downtown Fresno, my day started with cheap coffee and a habit I'd built from anxiety checking my savings account before work. I was an associate architect, and that account was my down payment fund. The one thing that made years of overtime and saying no to trips feel worth it. My loan officer had told me that just over $65,000 would make me competitive for a starter condo in a decent neighborhood, and I had finally crawled past that number. I opened the app expecting that reassuring balance. Instead, I stared at a number that looked like a glitch $213. I refreshed, logged out, logged in again. Nothing changed. A cold clarity settled in my chest as I drilled into the transactions and saw a single cashier's check made out to Donna Hayes 2 days earlier, authorized online and confirmed by a phone call from me. I knew exactly who had both my personal information and a long history of deciding that anything with my name on it was really community property for the sake of family. I called the credit union so fast I nearly dropped my phone pacing across my kitchen tile, while hold music fizzed in my ear. When a representative finally picked up and pulled my account, her tone shifted into that careful register people use when they know they're about to upset you. She explained that I had logged in from a new device, initiated a cashier's check for almost the entire balance, then called in to confirm it, answering every security question correctly. I told her I had not done any of that I was holding my phone and hadn't touched the account since my last automatic transfer, that whoever called had been impersonating me. She went quiet for a second, then said that if that was true, what I was describing was identity theft, and they had protocols their fraud department would cooperate, but I should file a police report as soon as possible. I hung up and stared at my reflection in the dark TV screen, hearing her words echo. I already knew who the suspects were, and I already knew they would swear this was just helping. I dialed my mom, still clinging to a tiny hope that there was some explanation that didn't end with me at a police station. She answered like she always did, a little too bright. "Morning, honey, I was just thinking about you." I didn't bother warming up the conversation. I told her my house fund was gone, that it had been converted into a cashier's check in her name, that the credit union had a recorded call they believed was me. There was the slightest pause, then she gave this airy laugh like I had overreacted to a parking ticket. "Oh, Josie, relax. We moved it to help Monica catch up on her salon lease. She was about to be evicted. That would ruin her. You're so good with money, you'll save it back in no time." The words hit like a replay of my entire childhood, being 17, with an acceptance letter to a summer architecture program, and hearing that my parents just couldn't afford it, then watching them pay for Monica's last-minute acting intensive because it's her dream. You can cope better. Back then, I had swallowed my hurt and told myself it was just bad timing. Now, with years of rent overtime and that concrete number representing actual independence, I stared at the wall while my mom kept talking as if it was perfectly normal to empty my account without asking because family. She launched into a speech about pulling together and how Monica's salon was practically a family business, how my condo could wait because you're young, You've got time. When I told her she had no right that the account was in my name, only her tone went sharp. She reminded me that I had given her my online banking login years ago when I got my wisdom teeth out in case of emergencies, as if that somehow covered this. I said, this wasn't an emergency, it was theft. She gasped like I'd slapped her, hissing that she couldn't believe I would use that word against my own mother, and hung up on me. Within minutes, the group messages started like she had been preparing for this exact confrontation. My grandmother Lois texted that Monica's salon was her whole life, and I shouldn't be selfish about a little nest egg when my sister's business was on the line. My cousin Brittany wrote a long paragraph about supporting women entrepreneurs and how sad it would be if the salon closed after everything your parents did to help you grow up. A second cousin chimed in about blood being more important than a down payment. My screen filled with versions of the same message: shut up, accept it, be the bigger person again. I took screenshots of every single message, dropped them into a fresh folder on my laptop labeled Family Pressure, and felt the trembling in my hands start to fade as the evidence stacked up. When the fraud specialist from the credit union called back, she repeated that they were flagging the transaction, but that law enforcement would need to be involved if I wanted any hope of reversing it. For the first time in my life, instead of rushing in to smooth over a mess my older sister and my parents had made, I listened. I printed my statements, tucked them into a manila folder, and drove to the Fresno Police Department with my heart pounding in that steady way that feels more like focus than panic. The front desk officer didn't flinch when I said I needed to report identity theft until I added that I believed my parents had done it. That earned a raised eyebrow and a call for an officer. Officer Peter Sandoval met me in a small interview room that smelled like stale coffee. I laid out my documentation, screenshots of the drained account, the cashier's check to my mom, the note about the recorded call, the folder of guilt-laden texts. He listened carefully as I walked through how my mom had gotten my login for emergencies, how she had admitted on the phone that they moved my money to save Monica's lease, how my sister already had a conviction for writing bad checks and was still on probation for it. He kept circling back to the same question. Did I want to press charges against all three of them, understanding that this could mean real legal consequences for my family? For a second, I saw every past moment where I had caved, where I had agreed that my feelings were less important than avoiding drama. Then I heard my own voice say, yes, steady and clear. Afterward, sitting in my car gripping the steering wheel, I realized that accepting what they had done would have been another choice, one that would tell them I would always sacrifice my future for Monica's mistakes. Calling my boss Anthony Briggs was somehow harder than talking to the police. I stepped into the parking lot, stared at the hazy outline of the Sierra foothills, and told him I might be in and out of the office for a bit because of a legal situation involving my family. When he asked for more detail, I made myself say it plainly. My parents had emptied my down payment fund without consent, and I had filed criminal charges. There was a long breath on his end of the line. Then he said, "You're one of the most reliable people in this firm, Jocelyn. Take the time you need. We'll shuffle the Riverwalk redesign. Your whole career doesn't hang on one meeting." His calm support cut through the humiliation burning my cheeks. I thanked him, ended the call before my voice shook, and went home to do what I always did when life felt like it was spinning. I organized. By the end of the night, my kitchen table was covered in neat stacks, bank records, family messages, and one thick folder I labeled Pattern. That one held the stories I'd tried to pretend were isolated incidents: the year Monica totaled my old Honda because she was texting, and my parents insisted I keep paying the loan because she's going through a lot; the time they refused to co-sign my tiny college studio because we already helped Monica even though I was working 2 jobs and had a scholarship. Looking at it all laid out, it stopped feeling like bad luck and started looking like a deliberate script. The next morning, my coworker and best friend Casey Nolan pulled up in her dusty Corolla, leaning over to shove the passenger door open. "You are not showing up alone with this hanging over you," she said like it was non-negotiable. As we merged onto Highway 41, I told her everything from the vanishing balance to the police report. She shook her head, muttered a few choice words, and then said louder, "Jocelyn, they didn't just borrow a little. They took your future house. That is not normal." At the office, our HR manager Megan Floyd caught the tail end of that sentence by the coffee machine and gently asked if we could talk in her office. She told me that if my family tried to contact me at work or showed up at the building, security needed to know the context, and that they could document and respond to any harassment just like they would for any other employee. It was the first time anyone in authority had offered to shield me from my parents instead of telling me to understand them. Word traveled quietly. At lunch, a junior designer mentioned her brother who had drained her savings for investments and how she had never seen that money again. The accounting manager, a woman I'd barely spoken to, stopped by my desk to say she'd once had to press charges against her own father for opening credit cards in her name. That afternoon, Anthony called me into a small glass-walled conference room where our senior partner, Norman Ellis, was waiting. My stomach knotted, half expecting a lecture about keeping personal issues out of the office. Instead, Norman said he'd heard there might be some family turbulence and wanted me to know the firm would support me if anything spilled into our space. Anthony added that if my mom or anyone else showed up uninvited, security and HR would treat it like any other harassment incident, not as family drama. I walked out of that room lighter than I'd felt in days past, rows of renderings and models that finally felt like part of my life, not something that could be snatched away, because my parents decided I didn't need what I'd worked for. Of course, my mom tested those boundaries almost immediately. 2 days later, just after lunch, Casey appeared at my desk, eyes wide, and whispered that my mother was downstairs in the lobby, loudly demanding to see me. My stomach dropped, but for once I didn't feel the urge to hide. I saved my work, took a deep breath, and rode the elevator down with Megan and our security guard, who already knew the basics. Through the glass, I saw my mom pacing in front of the reception desk, voice raised, telling anyone who would listen that her ungrateful daughter had ruined her sister's life over some stupid numbers on a screen. A couple of coworkers were frozen near the coffee cart watching the scene unfold. A project coordinator named Lamar stood off to the side, phone in hand, quietly recording in case we needed proof later. When my mom spotted me, her face shifted from theatrical outrage to fake relief. "Jocelyn, thank God. Tell them you're dropping this nonsense. You know we were just helping Monica." Every old instinct flared the urge to drag her outside to apologize for her behavior, to make it all small and quiet. Instead, I turned to the security guard and Megan and said in my professional voice, "This is my workplace. I already asked that my family not contact me here. Please escort this woman out and document that she is not authorized to be on the premises." My mom gaped like I'd spoken another language. "Jocelyn, you can't be serious. I'm your mother." She snapped, some of the performance slipping. I looked at the receptionist, then back to Megan. "She is trespassing in a secured office and disrupting business," I said evenly. "She is also the primary suspect in an active fraud investigation involving my finances. I need her removed." Security stepped in. Megan informed my mom that any further unannounced visits could result in police involvement. Lamar's phone kept recording. As my mom was escorted out, her voice echoed through the lobby, accusing me of betrayal, of turning strangers against my own family. The elevator doors closed on her shouting. Back upstairs, I ducked into a small conference room and waited for the adrenaline to burn off. I expected judgment whispers, side eyes. Instead, people drifted in one by one with their own stories. A coworker whose aunt stole her student loan refund, another whose parents had secretly taken out a second mortgage and expected her to cover the payments. Casey brought me a sandwich and announced we were starting a group chat called Team Jocelyn, so I would never have to sit alone with this in my head again. That night, my dad called, his voice raised before I even said hello. He accused me of humiliating my mom, of dragging their good name through the mud, of forgetting the roof they'd put over my head and the food they'd fed me 20 years ago. When he finally paused, I asked him to name one specific time they had supported me financially as an adult, without strings or sacrificing my needs for Monica's. The silence dragged on long enough that it became its own answer. He tried to pivot to how much stress my actions were causing, how everyone at their church knew how embarrassed he was. I logged the call in my notes and went back to my folders. Within a week, Officer Sandoval called with an update. Detectives had obtained the recorded call from the credit union and matched the number to my parents' landline. The voice pretending to be me failed the bank's more detailed voice check. It was my mom using bits of my past old street names, childhood nicknames as answers to security questions. Subpoenaed records from Monica's business account showed a deposit matching the cashier's check, followed by payments to her landlord and multiple credit cards in her name. Because she was on probation for previous check fraud, the district attorney's office took it very seriously. A few days later, Assistant District Attorney Jared Kim called me in. He sounded skeptical at first, like he expected me to say I'd changed my mind and it had all been a misunderstanding. I walked into his office with my binder of labeled tabs and we spent an hour going through everything. As he flipped through the pages, his skepticism turned into a kind of focused respect. He explained that prosecuting parents was unusual, that juries sometimes went soft when mothers cried and fathers talked about confusion. He asked more than once if I was sure I wanted to move forward. I told him about the invisible house that money represented, about the years of being the one who adjusted, while Monica burned through chances about the complete lack of remorse in every message I'd received since this started. Jared outlined the potential charges: felony identity theft for my mom, theft, and conspiracy for both my parents' probation violation and fraud for Monica. There would likely be a plea deal, he said, but only if I agreed to the terms. For the first time, I felt something close to control over a story my family had always acted like they authored. The backlash from my relatives ramped up as soon as they realized this wasn't going to quietly disappear. My grandmother left voicemails in a shaking voice about how families forgive and how she never imagined seeing a granddaughter take her own mother to court. Brittany posted a vague Facebook status about people who care more about granite countertops than their own blood, which half the extended family liked. Every time I saw something, I took a screenshot, noted the date and time, and slid it into my family pressure folder. My friend, Paige Turner, who worked in marketing and had a cousin in law school, insisted I needed my own attorney as a victim, someone whose only job was to protect me. She set up a consultation with defense attorney Lydia Ortiz. Lydia listened without interrupting, then laid out my rights restitution input on plea deals and the ability to request a no-contact order. When I admitted I felt like I was ruining their lives, she raised an eyebrow and said, "They made deliberate choices. You're just refusing to keep covering the bill." It was the simplest framing I'd heard, and it lodged in my brain like an anchor. Monica finally called, not to apologize, but to demand. She started off sobbing about her salon, how she had employees who would lose their jobs, how she had poured her heart into creating a space for women in Fresno, how I was crushing a community hub. When I stayed quiet, she dropped the tears and snapped, "You don't even have kids, Jocelyn. You rent, you can save again." Mom and Dad did what they had to do. She admitted almost proudly that she'd begged them to use my account because banks are stupid and you never even look at your statements, and that she'd planned to pay it back eventually once the business took off. She seemed genuinely baffled that I didn't see that as reasonable. I recorded the call with the same app I'd used for my parents' calls, transcribed it that night, and forwarded it to Jared and Lydia. It became another brick in the wall, showing that this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a calculated decision to sacrifice my future to patch yet another hole in Monica's sinking ship. The months leading up to court felt like living two parallel lives. During the day, I was an architect reviewing plans, arguing about materials, mentoring interns, and presenting designs to clients who had no idea what was going on in my personal life. At night, I was a victim witness, editing my impact statement, answering emails from Jared, and trading long messages in the Team Jocelyn group chat with Casey and Paige about boundaries and family myths. My parents tried one last charm offensive before the hearing, sending a handwritten letter through my grandmother full of words like miscommunication, and we thought you'd be okay with it, carefully avoiding the terms theft or fraud. They asked me to come to dinner at their house to sort this out like adults before it went too far. Against my better judgment, I agreed with Lydia, fully briefed, and my phone ready to record if necessary. That dinner was the scene I started this story, with my mom accusing me of destroying the family, my dad whining about legal bills and embarrassment at church, Monica mumbling that she had learned her lesson as if my savings had been monopoly money, sitting at that table watching my grandmother push food around her plate, and Brittany half listen while scrolling her phone, probably drafting her next dramatic post. I listened to my mom rewrite history. She painted herself as a martyr, claimed this was a misstep blown out of proportion, said the humiliation of being charged was punishment enough, and that dragging it into court was cruel. My dad piled on, talking about how everyone knew about the case and how hard it was on them. When my mom pointed across the table and said, "If you keep going, you're choosing strangers over your own blood," I felt something inside me finally snap in a clean, quiet way. I told them I wasn't choosing strangers. I was choosing myself. I said that adults who took $65,000 from their daughter's account without asking were not acting like parents, they were acting like thieves, and that if they wanted mercy, they needed to ask the judge, not me. The silence that followed was thick and sour, but for once, it wasn't my job to break it. The plea hearing at the Fresno County Courthouse a few weeks later felt like stepping into a movie I hadn't auditioned for. I sat on one side of the room with Lydia, my binder on my lap, while my parents and Monica sat at the defense table with their attorneys looking smaller than I'd ever seen them. A few relatives, my grandmother Brittany, a couple of others clustered behind them. No one sat behind me. That hurt for a second, but it also felt honest. Judge Francis Cole took the bench with the kind of no-nonsense energy that made everyone sit up straighter. The clerk read out the case, the state of California versus Monica Hayes, Donna Hayes, and Alan Hayes. Jared summarized the plea deal. Monica would plead guilty to felony identity theft, and theft. My parents would plead no contest to fraud, and conspiracy restitution would be paid. All three would serve 12 months of probation with mandatory financial counseling, and there would be a no-contact order protecting me with penalties for violations. The judge looked at me and asked if these terms matched what I wanted. My voice was steady when I said yes. Then came the part Lydia had insisted on. Monica had to read a statement in open court. Hands shaking, she unfolded a paper and read that she had asked our parents to use my banking information without consent, that she knew the account was mine alone, and that she understood this was theft and identity. Theft, not a loan or family arrangement. The word theft sounded wrong and heavy in her mouth. My parents each stood to enter their pleas. No contest to fraud and conspiracy, faces tight. My mom's eyes shone with tears, but I knew they were for herself, not for me. Judge Cole took off her glasses and looked straight at them. She said that parents who abused their child's trust to access her accounts were no better than strangers who stole wallets from purses, and that in some ways it was worse. She said their position of trust made their crimes especially serious, and that family was not a magic word that erased legal responsibility. Behind them, my grandmother dabbed at her eyes. Brittany stared at the table. I felt something in my chest loosen that had been clenched for years. Restitution didn't appear overnight. My parents had to refinance their house to come up with the money. When the check finally arrived at Lydia's office a month later, my mom's careful handwriting on the memo line read, "Only for Jocelyn," as if this were a thoughtful gift rather than court-ordered repayment. Lydia and I deposited it into a brand new account at a different bank, with every fraud alert option turned on, and no shared information with anyone in my family. The restitution covered my stolen savings, my legal fees, and credit monitoring. Monica's salon didn't survive the spotlight. Her landlord terminated her lease once news of the case spread, and creditors who had been patient before suddenly wanted their money. She moved into a cramped apartment on the edge of town and took a receptionist job at a chain salon. Jared told me later that her employer limited her access to any financial systems because of her record. My parents' lives shrank too. They sold their second car, dropped vacations, and according to a mutual acquaintance at their church, endured whispers and people changing seats when they walked in. Meanwhile, my life started to feel like it actually belonged to me. I threw myself into a downtown renovation project that ended up winning our firm a regional award. Norman promoted me to project lead on a new mixed-use development, and when he announced it at a staff meeting, the applause felt real, not pitying. Casey and Paige came over every few weeks for what we jokingly called Financial Independence Fridays, where we ate takeout from our favorite Thai place and talked about everything from retirement accounts to therapy. Megan quietly set flags in our phone system so calls from my parents' numbers were rerouted away from my desk, and she checked in after court not to gossip, but to ask how I was doing as a person. The constant knot in my stomach that used to tighten every time my phone buzz slowly uncurled until one day I saw an unknown number and felt mild curiosity instead of dread. My family of origin no longer had a direct line into my workday, my bank accounts, or my nervous system. Months later, my grandmother called again, this time from a blocked number so I wouldn't screen it. Her voice was softer, less scolding than before. She said my parents missed me, that the house felt empty without my visits, that Monica was trying and going to counseling. Surely, she said, after everything we could find some path back. I listened at my kitchen table, looking out at the dusty Fresno street, my coffee cooling in my hands. When she finished, I told her that my parents and Monica knew exactly what needed to happen before I would even consider contact. They had to take full responsibility in their own words, without blaming me, the court, or money. I said I was nowhere near ready, that I might never be, and that my priority now was my own safety and peace. There was a long pause, then my grandmother sighed and said she understood more, after hearing the judge talk about trust, that things had not been as simple as she'd wanted to believe. She said she loved me. I told her I loved her too, but that love did not mean letting people keep hurting me. About a year after the plea, an envelope with Monica's handwriting showed up in my mailbox. For a moment I considered tossing it, but curiosity won. Inside was a 3-page letter that was unlike any communication I'd ever gotten from her. She wrote about probation-mandated therapy, about a support group for people convicted of financial crimes, about slowly unpacking why she had always believed her needs came first, and why our parents had taught her she could treat other people's resources like backup accounts. She acknowledged in straightforward sentences that she had directed our parents to steal from me, that she had treated my savings like her safety net, that she had never really seen me as a separate person with my own goals. She didn't ask me to forgive her or to reach out. She wrote that she understood if I never responded, that the point of the letter was to say what she should have said before a judge forced her to, and to let me know she was at least trying to become different. I folded the letter, slid it into a folder labeled Monica, Accountability, and put it in my filing cabinet next to the court records and bank statements. Progress noted. No reply required. Today, when I walk through my apartment and look at the prints of buildings on my walls, the cheap but comfortable furniture, the file box with my new mortgage documents for a small sunlit condo across town, everything feels like something I chose, not something I'm temporarily holding until my family needs to cannibalize it. My parents, my sister, and the relatives who loudly backed them are not part of my life. There are no holiday invitations, no emergency calls, no surprise knocks on my door. I do not check their social media, and I do not send updates. My family now is people like Casey and Paige and Megan, coworkers and friends who help me lock my accounts, who sat beside me at lunch when the gossip was fresh, who reminded me that being the younger sister does not mean being an endless resource. The biggest lesson all of this hammered into me is that blood alone does not entitle anyone to your savings, your mental health, or your future. If someone repeatedly shows you that they will choose their comfort over your safety, believe them and act accordingly. I am done giving my parents and my sister chances, and I will not open that door again. If your family treats your life like collateral for their bad decisions, hear me clearly. You are allowed to protect yourself even if they call it betrayal. Thanks for listening to my story. Tell me in the comments. Honestly, what would you do in my place?